Now I've just removed the steering wheel because there was a lot of movement. I don't know whether you can see that move, but it's probably a good 1/4 of an inch of movement. Now I thought that perhaps the bearing had collapsed, but when I look at it and peel this seal back a bit, the actual centre of the bearing is not seating in the bearing cage itself, as if this needs to these locking nuts need to screw down and engage it more. So I'll just pull this apart and see whether in fact that is the case, whether it's an adjustment or whether I need to replace the bearing. This is actually quite an easy fix. The lock nut, the nut which holds the centre of the bearing in place wasn't all the way down, and what appears to be the case is that the lock nut that locks onto the top of it, it wasn't actually locked on tight enough. So what was happening is that both the lock nut and the nut holding the bearing were able to turn on the shaft. So as the wheel was turned, this gradually undid itself and allowing the bearing to come loose. So if I'll re-grease the bearing here, and I'll then tighten it down, and it should be fine. The bearing looks okay, and there'll be no movement in the shaft, which is good. So it saves me pulling the whole thing apart and replacing the bearings, which is what I was going to do originally. I've just finished packing the top bearing with grease and put the nuts back on and locked it up. It shouldn't come undone now, so that's been a good fix. So I won't actually pull the steering column out, and it should be fine. Everything seems to be working okay, so that seems to be quite finished as a simple job. What I'm actually going to do now is to start to remove all the linkages, and having talked to the previous owner again, he said the hydraulics are working, but at the top end of the lift it's not operating as it did years ago. So he suggested that maybe it's a good idea to have a look at the condition of the seals or whatever's in the hydraulic setup. He said he'd never done it in all his ownership, so what I'm going to do is to actually pull the top off, pull the pump out and assess its condition, and I'll work from there. So at this stage I'll start to pull all the linkages off, remove the PTO, and then start to pull the pump out and see what condition it's in, and see what I actually may need to just to improve its operation. Why? I wasn't intending to do this, but this tractor certainly won't be used for ploughing, but I intended to use the hydraulic lift, so I actually want to make sure it's working 100% or as close to 100% as it can be. So instead of going to all the effort of putting, cleaning it all up, painting it up, putting it all back together, and then saying some later stage, oh, I really should have pulled that out and had a look at it. So I'll do it now. It's a lot easier while it's in this condition. I'll pull the brake drum on this side of the vehicle apart just to look at its condition. Found a number of problems. I mean, it's filthy inside. That's all got to be cleaned up. A little bit of a weep from the axle. Not too sure whether I'll bother replacing the seal. It's quite a long involved process to do that. I'll just look at the condition of the shoes. If they're alright for the moment, I might just put it back together, but there are other problems. The piece that operates the levers was all loose. This was all flopping around in here, and the reason for it is that I can just see the remains of a spline on this piece. It's actually completely worn off and flogged out inside the plate that it's meant to be secured to. So all this was loose and flopping around. That's one problem, and I've got to fix that. The other problem is that at the end here, where the brake pedal goes, on there. This is meant to be moving inside the housing. Well, at the moment it's not. It's not completely jammed, but it really just doesn't operate the way it should. So I've actually got to pull all that apart, clean it out, re-grease it so it operates properly. So that's a problem as well. But I'll clean everything up and see what the condition of the shoes are and how this cleans up in here, and then make an assessment. I'll have to repair this. Maybe I can buy a new one, but I'll probably look at how I might repair that and actually fix that to the plate so it actually doesn't flop around, and so I can actually tighten it up. That'll mean that the brake shoes are operating properly. They obviously haven't been operating properly the way it's been moving around. I've now removed both brake drums and been able to look at the condition of the brakes. Once again, these bolts securing the pivot point for the shoes were loose, which obviously affects the way the brakes work, so I'll have to make sure they're tight when I put them back in. The shoes on this side were actually partly broken, so I'll have to get new brake shoes. There wasn't much oil on this side, a little bit, weeping. As I said, I'm not going to bother changing the oil seals. What I've found is that on the inside of the drum, this drum here, you can see there's actually an oil catch ring around here. So any oil that drips down from a leaking axle drops into that plate, and on the other side there are weep holes. Now I've actually cleaned those out. They were all blocked, so oil can actually escape to the outside of the drum rather than staying inside. So the leak isn't bad, so at this stage I'm not intending to remove the axle seals. One problem I have found, which is you can see around this side, is the locating point for the 3-point linkage. Now it's loose, and according to the workshop manual, it's actually held on by a bolt inside the housing. Now oil is leaking out of that. Now at this stage, I'll after I remove the pump, I'll see whether I can actually access it without taking the whole banjo off. But I can't leave it like that because oil is coming out. Now I know that the PTO was supposedly leaking through the seal. Now I've taken that off, but whether, well, certainly that could have been leaking, but the leak from this point over here was running down under the differential, so that's got to be fixed, otherwise I'm just going to lose oil. Now I know I said I wasn't going to pull the tractor completely apart and rebuild it, so this is a little bit perhaps unexpected, but I did mention that the tractor was, or the rear axle was leaking, and it was around the 3-point linkage mount on the housing. Now for some reason it's come loose. It's just loose enough to move around and loose enough for oil to come out, and the only way to tighten it up is to pull the whole axle out and the side of the diff open. So I've got to do that, and having done that, I'll take the opportunity of getting in there and cleaning some of the sludge out. You can see some sludge. I've cleaned up some out through the power takeoff hole, and I guess it was necessary to do. I could have ignored it, but oil would have continued to leak and be quite messy. And apart from that, when you pull everything apart, you can see this is the top of the pump assembly. There's sludge, there's all sorts of muck in there, which really needs to be cleaned out. Now, who knows how long that's been together, or whether it's ever been cleaned, but certainly it's all going to be cleaned up now. Everything seems alright on the axle, so and the main bearing on the diff, so I'm not worried about that. Certainly not going to pull that out. I was reluctant to pull this off, but I'll tighten that up next and then clean everything up, ready to put it all back together.